You have to be positive. You can't kind of doubt yourself.
Innovation and sort of dealing with issues is a global phenomenon of the industry. You just have to deal with it now. Availability was the number one goal.
When you dissect difference of invention and innovation, I guess invention, you can come up with something cool that's good, but when it creates business value is when it's innovation.
I think technology was very, very key and one of the most crucial elements in terms of getting ahead. You do whatever you want with your own device, right? Every successful application that we get, right, we will pay you 1,500 rupees.
In our businesses, when you start kind of providing that framework and ownership mechanism, wonders can happen.
Hello, you're with Echelon's Turning Point, and today, move fast but don't break things. Innovation at speed and scale. In the studio with us are Ruwindhu Peiris, business consultant and investor, Shyam Sathasivam, executive director at Sunshine Holdings, and Iftikar Ahamed, managing director at Softlogic Life Insurance. I'll start with you, Iftikar. Iftikar, you've sort of grown a business in a period of huge disruption. You gained market share. It's not just growth. You gained market share. How did you view the climate for innovation when you approach this in this disruptive period? How did you gain market share?
Yes, so thank you, and it's great to be here. I think when we look back, and even at the time when everything around us was going crazy, right? And I think the last 5 years, Sri Lanka has gone through all kinds of turmoil, starting with the Easter tax way back in 2019. Without looking at the things that we could not control, what we wanted to do was look at the things that we can control and focus on achieving what we needed to do, period by period. That means year by year, right? So Softlogic Life has basically climbed, 4 big market positions in 5 years. We have market share of now about 17%. We cover the most number of lives in the market, 1.5 million lives, even bigger than the number one player. And these positions that we overcome are also, very long-standing, deep-rooted institutions that we have taken out, or that we have overcome, or that we have overtaken. So what's I think important is that in every situation, you need to spot the opportunity. And in spotting that opportunity, right, if you strategize properly and if you, execute properly, I think execution is the key, right? You are bound to, reap good results. So I think the main thing is not to worry about what can go wrong or what's negative or what's the things that you cannot control. Focus on the points that we want to achieve and, just go for it. And you have to be positive, right? You have to be positive. You can't kind of doubt yourself. And if you also get your team and the people who are instrumental in achieving this, believing with you, I think that is a big thing, right? They have to be able to believe you and say, right, okay, we are all going here, right? We know we can do this. And if you see let's say if this is a 4-year or 5-year strategy, after the first year or so, once they see what has been achieved, they are with you, right? Then they are all looking to see what can we do next, right? And nothing is, too big in terms of a goal they want to set themselves. So, you create the belief that doesn't matter what's going on around you. And now, especially if you look back, now we are saying Sri Lanka is coming out of a negative stretch. We will hopefully see fourth quarter growth this year and then positive growth in 2024. So now we look at all those cues, all that chaos there, and we point to them and said, in this situation, if we did a 20% growth, what are we going to do next year? Yeah,
New baseline's been set, right?
Right. So great point, Iftikar, and I'll come to you, Shyam. Just for context, the last 5 years, Sri Lanka has had negative economic growth in 4. That is, I suppose, unprecedented by the experiences of most countries out there. Very few countries would be able to say that we've had such a torrid time, right? You and on Sunshine Holdings, I suppose the sort of climate has been even more unkind because you're in consumer goods and in pharmaceuticals, manufacturing and distribution, where you're in, you've had to deal with the additional layers of price controls, other regulations, not having access to the full plethora of drugs that are otherwise available all over the world to be sold here, etc. Right? How does one balance dealing with the current context, but still investing for the long term, investing in innovation that will ultimately maximize shareholder wealth creation?
Thanks, Shyam. And thanks for having us here. So two things. I think one is by virtue of being in healthcare, innovation and sort of dealing with issues is a global phenomenon of the industry, right? And then by virtue of being Sri Lankan, resilience is part of the DNA, right? Because as a country, this is 4 out of 75. So, we have to get on with what we're going to do. So what we looked at it from the context of when the Easter crisis was an early sign, but it was within our zone of impact. COVID really threw us off the first few sort of weeks of where things were going to go, because we're in the business of continuous availability. We deal with chronic products, patients on insulin and cardiac products. Now, the whole global supply chain shut down. So, and we're the last leg of a global supply chain. Right? So, but it gave us an opportunity to know clearly this wasn't one of those products where you could choose not to have. So it gave us an opening to reconnect in terms of we've got to do this. We've got to figure out how we're going to do it. There was no sit and wait it out. Right? We could afford to do that maybe on some consumer products. We couldn't with healthcare. So it gave our teams a mission sort of thing. We've got to get product out where, it's going to run out. In 60 days, we're going to run out. What's going to happen? So that helped, I think, sort of focus us away from the Sri Lankan problem to let's think a little wider as to what's going on. Now, you spoke about regulated market. I mean, healthcare globally is regulated. Our challenge, if anything, in regulated markets is how can you have a sense of, logic? So, here's what's going to happen. That's where I think leadership has to play a role, where we help the teams who can't deal with what is out of their control. Leadership has to take the role saying, I will deal with those. How do we set for your framework within your control? So we don't bring the out of control to the front line. They need to see a more clearer play of what do I need to do, right? Leadership team is there to resolve the rest. So we don't bring that to the table. So I think that's the 2 or 3 things we did in this situation, saying, here's where supply chains are, here's what you need to do. We will figure out the rest. So we reset expectations of what can be done. What is delivery now, right? Is it physical? Is it not? What is frequency? What is safety? A lot of things had to get redefined, and it took us a while. I think the first 90 days was, we were all scrambling. But as Iftikar just said, once you have gone through significant challenges, the resilience that builds in the team, the next 90 days we were even better off. So by the time I think the economic crisis came, I think we were broadly, we've gone through the shock. Now we couldn't import medicine, right? So, I mean, our entire industry pretty much works on importing product. Now you have no dollars to do so, and you have to increase prices by 80%. Healthcare products by 80% in any part of the world is an impossible pass-through. But I think you just have to deal with it now. Availability was the number one goal. So having defined it, now, we went down. So that's how.
So innovation in this context was making sure product was available. This is a critical product.
It was very much so that mission. I think that mission clarity helped.
Right. Ruwindhu, let's bring you in and broad question, sure. Right? Times such as these, tumultuous times such as these are also, amongst other things, a great time to relook at the fundamentals.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the famous saying, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. Sure. Right. It truly holds true. And from what both these gentlemen have said, I think it's a testament to that. I think it was interesting as I was hearing them, one of the common threads, I think, as you kind of start defining what's the fundamentals of innovation, To me, it really is mindset, right? I think everything else is secondary, right? It starts with the mindset of the leaders who are really navigating the company and whatever the forum that they're in. And interesting, if you think of the different times that we've gone through, right? They talk about different times that we are living in. And innovation, one of the first innovations of society was agriculture, right? You go back to the agriculture age, being able to not meander, but actually stay in one place and plant something and then harvest was the biggest innovation that humanity arguably had, right? You then went to the industrial age, where had you not transformed into kind of free capital from land, that was a distinguishing determinant, you weren't able to take part in that. Fast forward to the knowledge economy, if you hadn't transformed into digital access as the differentiator, you couldn't take part in that. We're actually now what people term to be in the age of imagination, right? And really the determinant of success in the age that we live in right now is mindset. Everything else, and there's a distinct difference of the first three, right? Whether it be the land during agriculture, free capital during the industrial age, access to digital during the knowledge economy, all those three things are quite tangible. You can kind of put a value to it. You can touch it, right? Mindset is an intangible. So it's a great leveler because everyone has it, but it's also a problem because no one else to blame. It's all you, right? So I think to me, as I think about innovation, as I've kind of looked across different situations, whether it be what we service with our clients in the US, opportunity that we've had, the opportunities we've had to work with companies in Sri Lanka, if there's one thing that really kind of stands out as a determinant of who's going to do well or not, you speak to the leadership team and you kind of get a sense for their mindset, that sets the tone. You really kind of know whether they're going to come through this up or not. So to me, that's kind of the one anchor point, really.
Iftikar, we're talking about, in our title, we are saying, move fast, don't break things, right? But we don't have to be stuck to this. I'm asking you at Softlogic Life, when you took over the role, surely move fast was a priority. Don't break things was the priority. Did you break stuff? What comes to mind as the thing that you had to break?
So I think if you take it in context at the time that Softlogic went into insurance, right? I come from a banking background, so I had absolutely not much knowledge of what insurance was. I didn't even know the difference between general insurance and life insurance at that time, right? So, but like I said, once we go in there, if we look at what works and what doesn't work, right? Moving fast also means that if there is potential in life, let's go with that. So, because earlier what we acquired was a composite business, it had both, right? And then the regulator mandated the split, right? So, and then obviously everybody is sentimental, everybody likes what has been there and say, no, we can do this general business as well, let's do both, right? But then at one point you start to realize, look, if you want to move fast in that, you need to put your entire focus in that area, you need to get rid of this, right? So then with that in mind, we actually divested the general insurance business, which in hindsight was, which was really good because it allowed us to put full focus in terms of, the life possibilities and where it could go. And so what it means is also when you break, so you break it away and, give it out, send it off. There is no point in keeping this and trying to, mess around with that, right? So I think if you were to give it context, breaking also means, things that don't work or learning to say no, I think is one of these other, famous things.
Absolutely.
If something is no, you say no and, let it go without having to, dwell on it and have it as an encumbrance.
Right. Shyam, you've been fairly kind to in describing the environment that you operate in. I think it's a lot tougher than than you made it out in that first answer. But if I were to ask you about, as a leader, what are your priorities now? You've got to sort of figure this out in your head before you communicate, before you sort of set the tone, set the pace for the organization, right? You've got a restrictive investment environment. Your customers need your product, but there's the affordability factor. You have to look at shareholder returns. Are you doing justice to your investors? You've got to think about, market share and stuff like that too, because I think there's now more players in this area than previously. What are you thinking about as a leader? How are you working this out in your head?
Sure. So two parts for us. Sunshine Holdings was both a family business in the context that went public and in multiple sectors. So we figured either you go in one direction, one particular industry and get excellence there, or you figure what skill can you take across multiple. And I think the early days, probably financial opportunities, etc. But in the last 10 years, the focus has become very clearly on once we have talented teams in place, it opens up a lot of opportunities for us to be a conglomerate, right? Because then we have people who can move across industries. I think we also got away from industry specific, lifelong, you stayed in one segment component, and we really started investing in once you have teams. So now today we have CEOs who have led the healthcare business now in the consumer end of it, somebody in the consumer end who's now leading our digital. So it has helped for us from a context of once we have talent, this idea that one dynamic leader can solve it all. I think we got away from, yes, there's an entrepreneurial lead, but today's business requires multiple teams to work through. The idea that I alone can figure out all the answers is an outdated idea. Right? I think it's come into this context of once you have teams, they come up with the solutions. Now, the challenge for us at leadership level, at board level, would be how do we empower? How do we set up the framework for them to deal with? There will be issues of capital resources. Now, how do you allocate capital? There will be uncontrollable concerns. Now, we went through price control, for example. Now, that year, it was impossible for lots of metrics to work. So now we have to reset as to, okay, what can we do now, right? We also take a call of what is our primary mission, right? So we were in this business for 40 plus years. Let's make product available and we'll figure out the rest, right? Because at that point, profitability, etc., was not the core, it was not going to get us to where we wanted to go. We are under pressure to evolve. Now, evolution requires both for us to ditch practices that are not working, move into spaces that are policy or working. Now, pharmaceutical manufacturing is national policy. Now, how do we participate in it? What do we need to do? What is the context of it? COVID has changed the health security perspective. Everybody feels there must be an element of local production because borders can shut down again. And there's nothing like an event to happen for people to really solidify on that concept of. So now, how do we do that while we still stay open to global innovation? Right? I work with customers who are the front edge of innovation in the healthcare business. It's vaccines, it's antibiotics, it's medical products. We went within 6 to 9 months of a vaccine, where the previous vaccine took something like 38 to 42 months to come. So globally, what has happened is we went through a product that close to 5 billion people have taken out of the 7. I mean, our customers are at that front end where it matters. So we're inspired also. So I think that's also, I see a Sri Lanka opportunity, right? You don't have to invent it, you can be inspired. And then we borrow from it. We borrow a lot from it. There are moments of doubt. I mean, you go through some really, we all open, we have events, gadgets that come overnight that throw us off, right? Yeah, definitely. It's just normal to sort of, feel like how much more can we absorb? Then I think you stomach it, you figure it out, how do we pace through this? We've gone through harder times. And also there are opportunities. I think we've found that most things that started out as an impossible problem issues also had, okay, now this is going to change how things work. So that's just some of the context for what it is. Don't get me started on healthcare issues.
Ruwindhu, you are a consultant by profession. You have a lot of clients in the US. You have investors who are looking to do PE deals who talk to you about, okay, is my thesis on this company accurate? What do you have to tell me about, what do you have to tell me about the cash flows? What do you have to tell me about the valuation as a result I've come to, right? We know the sort of negativity in the US over the last year. Interest rates are at fairly record levels. I think by what the US is used to, there's been a lot of mention about this D word, R word rather, recession, right? Not depression, but recession. It hasn't come to pass, but you have a gauge on this market. You have a pulse on this market. Is that market different, you think, to what we are experiencing here? right? You've had a strong preference to work
Sure.
for US or in
Yeah.
US with US companies.
No, it's funny. We were just talking about this earlier as well. I think, you mentioned about high interest rates, 5% being kind of the anomaly, right? I think that has to do with the cast of people who are operating right now in their lifespan, right? The 10 years that they were active, that was the norm. So they believe that to be the constant norm, but that wasn't true, right? Actually, or rather 1-2% being the norm and 5% being an anomaly is actually in the last 10 years, right? You go back before that, they were much higher, right? So I think as with anything, and this points came out earlier as well, Shyam said it beautifully, right? The shock hits you, you got to absorb it, stomach it, and then you move on. My read of, I think, where private equity capital markets are in US is right now, I think it took them the 12, 18 months to really digest this, right? A lot of it had to do with, I missed that, or I paid too much for a deal. I missed the opportunity to kind of pass on at a high valuation, have certain elements of how companies had not necessarily invested enough to do true value addition, right? When you buy in a deal, there was the opportunity to kind of create a lot of value purely through financial engineering, right? I mean, at low interest rates, at 1-2%, it's kind of free money, right? You buy a cash-free, a cash-rich company that hasn't levered. You take to the market, lever the company, bring up valuation. The need to really get in and do some of the messy, hard stuff was not as big, right? I think that realization that, hey, we need to go back to who we really are. And that's what private equity is. If you really kind of go back to the nuts and bolts. And in that sense, I'd argue that companies that have been doing deals in Asia have had to be doing this. That's the only way. We never had that, right? Whether it be the Indian company. So in many ways, I think my reflection is I think there's a huge opportunity for people who have been participating in these private equity venture capital markets in Asia to really start thriving, because that's the new norm, right? It's actually getting in and doing the hard yards, rolling up your sleeves, looking for pricing opportunities, change management, innovation. Those are the things that really kind of give you the 3x, 5x on real terms, as opposed to just purely kind of doing from a financial perspective, right? So to answer your question, I think, US is right now, we find that it's kind of forward-looking right now. People are saying, yeah, let's get on with it. Let's kind of make deals happen. For businesses like us, it's good news, because they're going to start leaning in more into doing value creation work, which, necessitates for experts to come in, more hands on deck, really to kind of help work through those things. So overall, I think it's very positive. But I think from a more Sri Lankan perspective and regional perspective, I think there's a great opportunity for us to start flexing the muscles that we've been exercising for the last while. We had to. We didn't have 1-2% interest ever, right? So we've realized how to get in and do that stuff. I mean, I'll tell you, I've been amazed at how technologically advanced we are in Sri Lanka and even in the rest of the region in terms of adoption and taking advantage of some of these new technologies, compared to some of these large companies that are massive in revenue, but necessarily haven't really adopted some of these basic technologies, right? And the reason is because they don't have to, right? The market is so big, 350 million people, you can really still grow without doing some of these hard transformational things. That's not going to be true going forward. They're going to have to start kind of getting into those waters. So we've done that. So I really feel that as a great opportunity for all of us. I mean, we're definitely taking a cue from that from our company's perspective and really leaning in on that, because we've been doing that. We can be champions and advocates of enabling others to kind of take that path.
Iftikar, you've grown the company during this difficult time, right? Let's assume we are turning the corner. Sri Lanka is potentially turning the corner, because there are reforms afoot that may put the country on a higher productivity path, a higher growth path as a result, right? As a CEO, how will this change your approach to risk, to innovation, and to doing growth at speed? Do you think your future will be different from the past in terms of how you approach it, your mindset as a CEO?
A couple of things that we also have to understand at the time that we really got stuck, and we had to rethink, re-strategize, and understand the issues that we had in Sri Lanka arising from this whole crisis, which was primarily a foreign exchange crisis. And now that it is tapering off, hopefully we'll have growth next year and things will improve. Yes, Sri Lanka has a lot of potential. If I speak on in terms of insurance, penetration is very low, 0.6 for life insurance. I think the peer average is almost 4 times in terms of potential, right? But as a Sri Lankan company, and especially in the area or the industry that you are, I feel it's also important to think of what is the potential outside Sri Lanka, right? For example, if you look at some of the regional markets, and for example, let's take Bangladesh as an example, because I think a lot of people refer to Bangladesh. Now, we've taken a look at the potential for insurance in Bangladesh, and it is absolutely huge, right? So Sri Lanka, with 22 million people and the population there, right, with 160 million people, and the what valuation you can achieve in the next 3 to 5 years on improving business here versus going up there, setting up that same business, or just taking a copy and paste into that market, what you can achieve as a Sri Lankan company is phenomenal, right? So I think what you need to do is, yes, Sri Lanka is your home base, right? You need to see how you're going to improve things here, but whilst doing that, very important to see what's around, right? What are the other opportunities that are there, and then to see, let's pick let's pick the first one and the second one, and let's start those, because then you're also diversifying from your present situation, right? And that then also provides all kinds of opportunities. Your team gets cross-border exposure, career opportunities open up, they get motivated. We are now doing a new thing, we are creating new value, and at the end of the day, right, if you create value, right, that is, you can use that value to actually reward people, keep people, do the whole thing, right? So I think all the time, if we keep on saying, where is the value, what are we creating, right, and how can we continue to improve it, right? And I think a lot of businesses, right, and I'm talking from an insurance perspective, when I see that scope, and now with this whole insurtech, fintech, technology has changed so much of things, right? So if you have those resources, if you have those teams, and the domain knowledge relating to specific areas, the sky is the limit, right? And it can be a very, very interesting future into 24 and beyond.
This is what I love about having bright people around this table, right? In the midst of this crisis, how many people in the financial sector are saying, "Oh, Bangladesh is the opportunity," right? It's awesome to hear. What about yourself as a CEO makes it possible for you to think like that? Because there's dozens of other financial sector CEOs who are not thinking like you.
Yeah, so tough one. But I think it's about how you motivate yourself. What do you see as achievement? What kind of outcome do you want to achieve? You're here for a specific period of time, right? The same thing is not going to be there for forever, right? So you got a finite amount of time. You got to make the most of that, right? And it doesn't mean that you break everything, right, when moving fast, right? But as long as you know that you can take it forward at speed without breaking it, I think you need to basically strategize that. You need to surround yourself with the people who can also, think similarly and who will support that view. And I think at the end of the day, you just have to go for it. But I think that freedom of thinking also is how you set up your organization, right? And leadership is about also freeing yourself to, they say, leaders should be actually thinking about, the future rather than the present, right? Because that is where your thought process should be. Today's business, the guys in the office, they can run it, right? And if you have to be there you tell them what to do today, then that's not leadership, right? They should be able to do what's going on today. Our job as CEO or MD or a leader of an organization is to think about what is the organization going to do next and next and next, right? And then if you have that path lined up, then you get belief, then you get the people whom you need, and then you just keep on turning this over and over.
Shyam, you're in pharma manufacturing amongst other things. I think capacity utilization would be fairly low in pharma manufacturing at your organization also. In the industry it is, right? Can you give us a number?
If I can just jump in a little on that previous point what Iftikar spoke about was strategy, right? So one is a personal life strategy, but also as a company, then you spoke about the country, this perspective of what do we want to do, right? Fundamentally, it's about 22 million people having a much better quality of life. That's the whole point of how do we get everybody there, and whatever it takes to get there, whether it's building value, in different ways. So for us, my experience in our company was, we did 3 acquisitions in the last, 36 to 24 months. We went into confectionery business 6 months into COVID because it was on strategy. Here was an opportunity. We had agreed before COVID hit. Still keep going, which was let's grow. But of course, we ring fenced it so the debt and all those levels were, so that we didn't, because we had an existing commitment to our existing employees, right, in terms of what we felt in a conservative way. 6 months later, we bought a pharma manufacturing business. Again, we saw it coming, health security, here's where it's going. It hadn't made sense till then. Let's go. It makes sense. But the context is we were ambitious for growth and we're confident about our teams. We had the today teams to run the current businesses. 6 months later, we bought an export business from the context of we can't rely on our domestic consumer business alone. It's time for us to diversify to other customers beyond Sri Lanka. So therefore, it's this context of where do we want to go? What do we want the business to be? I would apply the same attitude to the country in the context of what's our strategy, right? It has to be inclusive. It can't be the 1% getting more. It's got to clearly be, this context of how do we carry everyone, but we can't do it in our current, subsidy addiction sort of perspective, right? All of us, I don't think as industries, we've paid for energy at its true cost. Therefore, now we have to retool. All of our manufacturing now has to retool to be competitive. So if I was competitive before to export, well, with today's energy costs, I'm not so. Now we've got to retool. We'll get back, but it's a margin hit right now, right? So that same context of, so we spoke about pharmaceutical, our capacity. I mean, we believed in a particular good times. Well, the world's changed since then. Since acquisition to date, our customer went bankrupt. My customer is the government of Sri Lanka. That customer has gone bankrupt. And now it's coming out. Like, whatever business plan I had just got punched. Right? So now we've got to refigure what's it going to do. So we're going to think, how do we go beyond? I don't have a plan. I was just telling them, I import equipment from the country I'm hoping to compete with in export. So I haven't figured that solution yet, but I think we'll have to, get there. That's where it is. I think we haven't figured it out. It's this fighting mindset.
Sure.
Okay, we've come through worse, right? We all have these battle scars right now. I mean, you guys had one problem globally, we've had three, right? So, you had just COVID. We were sandwiched in between and we're still standing. So why not? I mean, why wouldn't we think, a market 10x bigger than us, we can do it.
Sure. You've got to also, despite what you're saying, and then that's great to hear from you what you're saying, you've got to also balance your ambition for growth and your positioning the business for growth with the cost of capital and returns to wealth maximization, right, or shareholder value maximization. Capital is expensive, and it's a difficult conversation to have right now about deploying capital. This is a broad question, but how's the conversation framed around this? Because you've spent money.
But I think we'll have to also get out of businesses that cannot create value. We've held too long to assets that don't create enough value, both at a country level and at a company level,
Exactly.
right? We really need to go back and be like, why are we sitting on all of these assets that are going nowhere, right? It's been safe in the past. It's no more. Right? Today, you got to get sharper, clearer. People have got to push back. So as a country, we are sitting on assets we can do much better with. Right? So and that's where the 5% is a problem. We were 25%.
Exactly. 35.
Yeah.
35.
Yeah. So in that context, I think it forced us to
Precisely.
look at where is our capital going. No business can survive 25%, interest costs, right? No business can. Now I think we're coming into 10 to 15% seems like
Wow, great, right?
great. So in that context, but I think it's forced us to look at space. I'm only worried as it drops down, we'll give up on the fixes and get comfortable again.
Exactly.
On the easy money days.
That's right.
Right. So I think that's where the context is. I think we're going to force it. I would find that if we're selling anything domestically, we were talking about this about affordability. You have to give better value to the local consumer because he is strained, right? In everything we do, right? We've got to. So, whether it's he's got 50 rupees for a pack of tea. You better figure out your product that fits into that. That's the only note that's coming out at the grocery store. You better have product in return for it. You can't have a 55 rupee conversation with him. We've got to get detailed as to, how is it. That's the challenge.
Large companies, amongst other things, are not known to be nimble, Ruwindhu, right? In this context, right? And if you apply this sort of thinking to the context we're in, Shyam is talking about, let go of that stuff that's not adding value to your core. Focus on the core. You've been doing deals, not necessarily in Sri Lanka, but in the US. What's the typical approach you see when several of these pressures that companies don't enjoy, including the cost of capital, including the ability of consumers to afford things, are all pressing on the margins? How does a large company deal with this kind of situation?
Yeah, I think the answer is set up to what you read the conversation around, right? It's innovation, right? The only way out of that is to and when you dissect difference of invention and innovation, I guess invention, you can come up with something cool that's good, but when it creates business value is when it's innovation, right? That's really the distinction between invention and innovation. And you find that forces people to come out with the best innovations, and whether it be business model innovation, whether it be about customer centricity and how do you get closer to your customer, to Shyam's point about that's innovation, right? You're coming back and understanding, here's affordability. How do I now fit everything into that, right? I think one thing, not directly to your question, but I think very relevant to what large companies are going to have to adopt very fast and take on. And in all of these waves of technological revolution in the past, what you found is new entrants have an advantage compared to the old guard, right? Because a lot of cannibalization and rethinking that you have to do. And I think we're in the midst of it right now. We're in the vortex. There's a lot of conversation, but I would argue not a whole bunch of clarity about what AI really is, right? And I think truly taking a step back and getting off the whole, tech story about what from an economic perspective does AI mean? And then having clarity about that's going to be super, super important for enterprises and the country at large for us to kind of go forward, right? And then I think, I'm sure you guys have heard this, but the best analogy of what AI is kind of what electricity was in the 1890s. That's really what we're going through right now, right? And actually, there's an interesting book written by a bunch of economists, which I like, compared to tech guys, about AI, called Power and Prediction, right? It's a fantastic read, actually. I urge you to kind of go through it. Quick thing of it is they actually did the analogy of these two things. And you found that it took actually 40 years for electricity to be pervasive. From 1890, it was until like the early 1900s that it really kind of became mainstay. And really what happened was that in the first introduction of electricity, it was viewed as point solutions, right? So there was large kind of these massive steam engines that were producing power. Everything around it, the whole systems and ecosystems were geared to take on this massive inlet of steam. So you had the largest machine in the center, 3 stories high. You had dissipation, so you had all these other machines around it. So when electricity first came, they just replaced this big power source with electricity. The results were kind of mediocre because you're just replacing a point solution. It wasn't until the discovery that actually the real value of electricity was the fact that you could now decouple the machine from the power source. That was a real invention, right? And when you realize that, all of a sudden you could take your factories way out because you could transmit power for long distances, your real estate costs came down. You didn't have to have 3 stories, you could have long flow factories. And the way that they produce stuff changed. So net, really what it was that you had to think system change, right? If you just looked at electricity as an invention at that time and just tried to replace point solutions, you weren't really kind of taking full advantage of it. Similar for AI, I think we're going through a sea of point solution applications right now. Everyone's jumping on it, right? Which is great. But I think the true winners, right? And you take insurance is a great example of this, right? If you think of application, where the best application of AI is. And if you dissect AI, really it's about predicting. It's brought down the cost of prediction and the accuracy of prediction has gone up, right? So for a business like insurance, until we're at the point you can reframe and say, hey, by and large, insurance is risk transference today. You're taking on the risk. But if you start thinking of this as risk mitigation, right, the power of AI becomes enormous and you can start doing a whole bunch of other things with it. But our current business models are not set up to take that kind of change. So few companies, existing companies are going to be challenged when a new company comes in, they can re-look at this whole thing and say, actually, you know what? It's not about risk transfer, it's about risk mitigation. I'm going to approach this whole industry in a different light using AI. So they're going to be at an advantage. So to answer your question, I think for the large companies, the takeaway is, I think, how do you adopt AI from a systems perspective as opposed to point solutions? You have to have the ability and the guts to question everything, like you guys just said, right? Have the audacity to kind of say, I'm going to really reframe my whole problem statement in the first place, and then kind of bring in this technology. To me, I'm personally really excited about that. And I think those who are able to kind of take on that challenge, and as a country, I think we're well suited, because this is where small numbers, the fact that we're 2 degrees separated as leaders, we're all probably within 50-kilometer radius who can really influence stuff as a community, right? As that group can come together and really kind of transform ourselves, I think the ability to lift the country is very high compared to any other place. And then hopefully that's what will make happen.
Iftikar, when you went for this phase of growth, what role did technology play? Was technology a competitive advantage in your higher than market growth? I think you had compounded 25% annual growth for 5 years running, something like that. Right. What role did technology play?
Absolutely. I think technology was very, very key, and one of the most crucial elements in terms of getting ahead. And I'll give a couple of very simple examples. So what happens in life insurance is there's an advisor who goes, speaks to the customer, fills out a form, sends it, right? And so the first thing that you do is you give everybody a device, right? You give Apple iPads to everybody. 200 guys have that. And the problems that come out of that are enormous. It's offline, it doesn't work, it's getting jammed, usual stories. So we looked at it and look. Now, and if we now try to do this, then they use, obviously they'll use it for their personal use as well. They're not going to keep it only for office use, right? We thought about this a little bit and said, hey, look, we're going to change this, right? You do whatever you want with your own device, right? Every successful application that we get, right, we will pay you 1,500 rupees. We basically broke it into the average of, number of applications that we receive over 18 months, which is basically the payoff for the device. So every successful one that we get, we pay you 1,500 rupees, right? And you bring your own device. So we sorted out the security protocols in terms of, all that to make sure that it's everything, right? You 5 of you get together and do one device, or you use your parents' device. It doesn't matter, right? As long as we get the application, we process it, we pay you 1,500 bucks. All those problems within a space of, I think, 3 months, 100% digital. Right? So, but that is now, if we try to do that whole digital thing, we are going to go digital, we are going to give you this device, you take this device, you put it on that, right?
Great example.
Focus on outcome, right? Yeah. So that sorted. Right. And now, so that is that guy's home office. He has a portal. All these things are on that. His diary is there. Everything is there, right? And transformation virtually in a very short space of time. So I think to me that is one of the nicest stories that I can come up with in terms of how you use technology, but at the same time you use it in a way that you don't compel them. It's very difficult sometimes to compel them to say you have to use this, right? But when they see the advantage of actually getting it, doing it, and that they're getting then paid for it, because then they can have their own device. They can do whatever they want with it. That's fine, right? But as long as we get our policy.
If I can jump in on that, I think that's a great example and lays up what I've experienced as phenomenal about what private equity does is this notion of ownership, right? And actually, Pete Stravos from KKR has this whole thing called Ownership Works. It's actually a fantastic kind of resource for a lot of people, where when private equity comes in, and most of them have now realized that really aligning everyone to the end objective and providing that ability for them to own part of the business and take part in the wealth creation journey, right? You spoke about our biggest issue being disparity, right? How do you ensure that the top 1% doesn't keep getting richer at the cost of the bottom? In our businesses, when you start kind of providing that framework and ownership mechanism, wonders can happen, right? And I think what you just mentioned is a great small example of that, where you make them participants and owners of the problem and the solution, right? it does phenomenal things, I think, in terms of really getting people to be co-conspirators in innovation and kind of coming up with solutions. So that just kind of got me thinking that, wow, even in applying technology, if you kind of take on that mindset of let's give ownership, right? Then become owners of this. And, they participate, they find their way, right? As opposed to sometimes we get too caught up in trying to be prescriptive.
Yeah.
The best
Ruwindhu, do you find like one of the challenges we are seeing is data transparency? This context of not privacy
Sure.
is clear.
Transparency.
The transparency today is at a phenomenal level,
Yeah.
which I think maybe we are in we have one leg in either space.
Yeah,
right? So
right.
today there's sensors across. Earlier it was physical sensors.
Right.
Now it's digital.
Yeah.
Your time, everything.
Yeah.
So activity, the time it takes to fill an application, when you did it, did you want to do it? That world requires a different engagement,
Absolutely.
right? From the, hybrid is one component of it, but it's this context of what we are challenged with is what's actually happening?
Right.
Why are we imagining stuff, right?
Right.
You has information about the consumer.
Yeah.
You know far more actual data points than how a few of us would read a little bit and imagine.
Sure.
Now you clearly know. I mean, in Healthcard, we know from customer loyalty data in terms of what they purchase, when they purchase, what's happening, what's peak, off peak.
Sure.
Google before we figured out what peak, Google
Google
told
tell
us
you.
what peak time was.
That's right.
So it's and what's peak time in our competitors?
Yeah.
How come we're empty at the same time?
That's
What's
right.
going on? So I think a lot of the innovation for us right now, I mean, we don't have large capex to bring significantly new technology on our own. We're just, participating in common technology that's already there. And it's a business model issue for, here's what's going on. How do you want to do it? So we deal with 2,000 doctors a day. They can Google. There's nothing I can go tell them about a product. Right? They have access to information. Earlier, we were purveyors of the information.
Yeah.
Now, and we went into the iPads as well. Then they put in iPad, you can you can just see what the timing is. Nobody was opening this during workday, right? So I think we have to figure out what is the context.
And Shyam, you bring up a great point, right? I mean, that's literally what, with the whole ChatGPT or the OpenAI fiasco, was really around that, right? Because what Sam Altman and the team were doing was actually coming up with this AI kind of app store or equivalent, where what they've done is to say, hey, how do companies like you who have data assets, right, not have to worry about the LLMs, not have to worry about this massive horsepower needed to kind of really bring, those algorithms are the hard ones, right? But the real business value comes in applying those in context to your data, right? So they've really made that open, and you're going to find, similar to what the App Store is for Apple, these kind of models being kind of made available. And just the fact that you're thinking that way is really and that's why it comes back to mindset, right? Innovation is going to happen in just the curious mind who says, what do I do with this shit, right? I have this data, I need to do something with this. There must be a solution. Now, just the spark of that idea, what's happened is it got democratized. It used to be only the very, very few had access to it. But now that's going to be pervasively available. And you're going to find that the few that take advantage of that fastest are going to be the winners, right? And
Talk to me, each of you, about a challenge you've had because of the scale of your organizations already. I mean, it's so much more difficult to do things, right? You've got so many more people to align, and that's important. Talk to me about a difficulty you've had. And you may or may not have overcome it successfully, but as a learning, talk to me about doing innovation at scale.
So somebody at work told me if telling or knowledge was enough, by now there will be no war, given all the sermons that have happened in all religious institutions. As though you just told the population and now they're aware and they would act on it. We've had to realize in our businesses, telling is different from communicating, is different from understanding, is different from acting. It's like, how do we influence behavior? How do we get people internally first, before I can expect customers to see value? Internally, a lot of, I think we went from a charismatic leader with 50 people who would listen to every word he said, to large multiple units. So this context of engagement, right? The challenge we continuously have is, how do I get you to feel ownership mindset? How do I get you into the mission? How do I want you to I can see the failure of delivery at the customer end, right? I'm standing at a health card and watching that person. He's not helping that customer. But the point is in the individual. As a system, we have not been able to get him to feel, read the room, see the individual, stand up. So then we go back and what's happening? Is it, we're talking about it, it's written in ISOPs, but it doesn't play out. And, executing continuously, that's been our challenge. It's just continuously going back. We have lots of aha moments of saying, but it didn't happen. So we were talking about, where are the employees? Are they on TikTok? Are they on Facebook? So I've got to go there, right? It's the company manual is irrelevant. Nobody reads it, right? Are we aligning with him? Here's a 28-year-old. His aspiration is so different from his supervisor who's 38. So they're like a generation apart, right? The wife, 2 kids, and a car and all is irrelevant to this guy. I mean, that's what we are going through.
Iftikar, you
Okay. So if I just bring this example in terms of insurance and life insurance. So insurance is primarily sold by advice or a agent, right? He goes out, makes an appointment, sells insurance. So now we look at this like this is like our foot soldiers, right? They are like an army. They are guys who are structured. They are layers, and they march in formation, right? So they go left, right, and they're seriously marching forward. Now all of a sudden you can't go and tell those guys, right turn coming up, turn right, and then after that, after a few minutes, they turn left again. No, right? That doesn't work, because then there is total confusion, and then some guy at the back are wondering whether they said the correct one, and no, which the other way should go the other way, this way. All kinds of. So what we done is we said, let this team go. Let this, the foot soldiers be foot soldiers. If we want to create separate distribution, and if we want to create a team of snipers, for example, let's create that team of snipers. They go separately, right? They take out the targets where with one shot, they get 5, 10, 100, whatever, right? And then if you want a separate unit, which goes like in terms of drones or whatever it is, which we call basically a platform strategy, they are acting separately. So first of all, there is no conflict between these 3, right? And in terms of whom they are meeting and what they want to achieve, also there is no conflict, right? Because that's where normally the issues start, right? So we've kept this separate, and we've let them, each of them do their maximum. We're not trying to, reduce one at the expense of the other, right? We're saying, all of you guys, go do the best that you can, right? And as a result of that, now I think agency distribution even at our place used to be 99%. We brought it down to 65%, with agency growing 15 to 20% annually. So you can see, right? Yeah. So once you set it up like that, it gets everybody knows what they have to kind of deliver, right? And then you get a nice outcome.
So you innovated the sales model. You completely turned it on its head, right? When you went from 99 to 65, right? Where was the friction? I mean, people are territorial, or the units are territorial. Did you have that friction?
Of course, yeah, because traditionally what happens is the guy who's leading agency in the office, he's the biggest guy in the room, right? You don't want to upset him, because the slightest thing off he goes to the competitor, right? So I think it's very important to understand the overall mission. Right? So we tell everybody, look, we are number 5. Do we want to be number 5 or what? Right? Or shall we try and see how we, get to the next step? And in order to do that, we have to do a few other things. Let's try and see whether it works, right? Let's try and see whether there is conflict. Let's make sure there is no conflict, and let's not diminish the importance that is given to the key team or the main team. And I think then slowly people understand, we can coexist, we can deliver, there is no problem, there is no challenge to us, we don't feel less important, things like that, right? So, and I think it works. It works. Once people understand the setup, it works.
I think a quick question on that. I'm wondering whether was ownership part of it again, where they felt that, hey, I'm going to participate in the spoils of the bigger picture as opposed to just my team, right? Because it sounds like that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, but I think there is now if you see, it's a bad example, but now, for example, the LTT, right, was successful because they were passionate bunch of guys, right? They had a, objective that they want to achieve. So I think once that belief or that feeling comes to a team,
The big ownership.
that we want to do this.
Be
We
number
want to back
two,
those, or we are number one. Sure, the last lap to go.
That's right.
But once they start pushing for that, yes, all those things of their remuneration, increments, all that has to happen. That's like a hygiene factor, right? But that bigger purpose is once people buy in, it's a serious commitment. Yeah.
I think the context of ownership mindset we've also figured. I think early days was about high rewards.
That's right.
And then it settled into reward is a natural consequence of that. Once I have purpose, it's a given that you have to put it together. People should feel that we all do well. There's this concept of there's enough for all
Together
of us.
we win,
Among all stakeholders, there's enough. Between shareholders, and there's no conflict.
Not at the cost of one. It's not a trade-off, right?
Because there's enough success.
Precisely.
But we got to then go to market leadership. There is this context, which is hard to get, especially in a local market where there's still, there's economic crisis correction. Then these things get adjusted. Now we're resetting, right? People are coming in to hold on. I didn't know taxes was such a big deal. Now, so that equation, so there's a level of difficulty coming into all of our businesses of now how do we we got to re-engineer for this, and how do we get them going? Our business models are being affected, so we've got to figure that, and then figure out the value creators and how they feel. But we have figured that every time we get them along, but it's really, really hard. I mean, all credit to Iftikar and team. He says it quite simply. It is the few who can really get it aligned, because there are so many forces at you, even in a normal space, right? And then technology wipes you in a different way. I mean, our paranoia is which parts of our business will be obsolete in 3 to 4, 5 years. I think those days you could look at technology and it's 10 years out there. It ain't going to happen right now. Right? Now, I don't think you could, you could say things. We're seeing new guys come so rapidly that
they have nothing to lose, right?
Yeah.
It's so accessible. It's not expensive, right? And you can turn it on, very, very fast.
Oh, that's right.
Right? Because we have in-house development team, those guys, and especially because they have the domain knowledge and the IT part of it, then it's when it combines, it's not like trying to give a development mandate to some outside firm. Say, come development, that guy then drafts up the scope. He says this is how long it's going to take, etc., etc. Hey, these guys already know it. So you need to connect these three. Right. And then the other thing, I think the trick is not to try and develop, core systems and big things.
Absolutely.
You just need to, that point solution thing, right? You just need to be connecting these two and give the customer or your business partner what they require. Right. If you achieve that, and you can do that within 3 to 6 weeks, you're on. Right?
It's a great example. There's this new guy who's competing with on the ChatGPT platform called Lindy. Right. This guy is creating a bunch of Lindies, and I forget the founder's name, but he brings a great example of how aluminum used to be the most precious metal, right? It used to be Napoleon. I think he used to drink out of that versus gold, platinum, all were kind of secondary because it's so scarce, right? Now to the point where you don't even think about it, you throw away, right? So his view is that coding is going to be like that, right? Throw away code, right? To create a framework where it's no code environment, you're stitching together things. And to exactly what your point is, just the mindset has to now adopt into saying, I'm going to just create stuff. I'm going to enable people to solve business problems. Answers are cheap. It's the question that matters right now. I think if you kind of convert to that, right? Because we all worked on the premise earlier that it's very costly to come up with answers, right? So you didn't question the question. Now it's about take time. Am I solving the right problem, right? Because answers are dime a dozen right now.
Iftikar, your industry in particular would be, whatever it's Shyam's in manufacturing, you have to manufacture the tablet, right? Yours is you're in services. That's it's relatively easily disruptible.
Absolutely.
How do you keep yourself and teams sharp in this context? There could be an app that I don't know, crowds
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that is basically what we need to watch out for, right, in terms of our industry. Because, and the other thing is to think that there is always going to be something or someone that is going to be at your door, or that is going to disrupt you, right? You always need to see that in a rearview mirror what's basically coming up, and more importantly, you need to see what are you doing next. Right now, whilst we are doing traditional insurance, we are thinking of other things, right?
How do you solve
What
this
is our next strategy, right? It might be insurance related, right? It might not be from this company, right? It can be a different approach, a different path, right? And whilst we are doing that, then we are seeing what are the other guys in that space, what are they coming up with, right? Because see, at the end of the day, the Amazons, the Googles of this world, they have all these things. It's only for them to basically put it together and bring it here. Then we will not be here. But then at least we will have valuation at that point, right? So I think if we are smart enough to see what's coming next and next and next, right? We have to keep on doing that. It might not be in this business, but it is related to what we're doing, so that we know what to kind of expect. And we are also in that space, kind of.
This has been a tremendously engaging conversation. But can I ask each of you to take maybe a minute? Any final thoughts? I'll start with you, Shyam.
No, so I think we have to stay resilient, right? We have to stay resilient. We just can't do what we've done in the past. I think so. Innovation is going to be it. The don't break, I think, is we've got to carry a lot more people along. I think this can't be an individual success play. I think we now need to get a little bit more, bring a lot more people along with us.
We are here, and we are looking for Sri Lanka to do well, right? If you actually look at all the problems as a country that we have, and we put it on this table here, we'll probably solve them in 15 minutes. Seriously, right? And then it's a question of actually executing that. So I think from a national standpoint, if we can have that kind of focus with the priority, I think we will do wonders as a country, right? So our hope is that we get that focus along, so that from a national perspective, we go on a strong agenda. But when it comes to the corporate area, it's our roles. We know exactly what to do. We've done it, and it's worked, and it's worked fast. Hopefully, it will also continue to work fast and not break. So we're very confident about the future, right? So, but if we have the national framework also going along with it in the same way, it will be great.
Yeah, I agree with all of this. I think for me personally, the mantra that I've been really trying to kind of apply to myself, and I think would serve all of us well, is to be a lot more demanding. I think as a nation, we lived a very comfortable life. We like, subsidy lifestyle to island mentality to all of that, I think has been great. But I think for the future generations, right? I think all of us have kids, for my grandchildren, I don't think I'll probably make it for my children's sake, but at least for the grandchildren, I think we owe it to them to be a lot more demanding of ourselves. We have what it takes, talk about the past and all the glories is fine. But if you don't act, to your point, on the opportunity that's at hand, we're not going to make it happen, right? You get what you tolerate. We've tolerated a lot of stuff. I think we need to be a lot more demanding of ourselves, individuals, but also demanding of each other. Be very candid. We had this conversation, right? Let's not sugarcoat stuff. Let's be very direct. You can say anything, it's how you say it, right? But don't take away the what. Be very, very focused about, hey, here's what the opportunity is. Nudge people, bring people together, coalesce. I stand with what I said earlier. I think we have a phenomenal opportunity as a country because of, the top 1% of the country are 2 degrees separated in a 50-kilometer radius. No other place has that kind of connectivity ability, right? And to what you just mentioned, forget about passing the blame to anyone else. Let's just come together, right? If we solve the 80% that all of you are talking about, control, the controllables, if we just did that, there's a lot at hand that we can make happen, right? So I think be demanding and just go after it and execute.
Ruwindhu, Iftikar, Shyam, great conversation. I thank you.
Lovely, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.